Very good. Do I hear a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Kim,
I'll second.
seconded by Angie. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Approved. Right. Barb, that's your cue.
That's my cue. Great. Well, thank you so much. First and foremost, on behalf. Oh,
Go ahead and introduce yourselves.
okay. Are we going to go around the room for board members first, or do you want Jeff and I to kick off with some introductions? How would you like to proceed?
Either we can introduce ourselves. You know, Kathy.
Yep.
Ashley. Just go ahead.
Bruce Olson, board member.
Bruce, you said?
Yes.
How long have you served? If you could also share with us maybe how long you've served on the school board, that would be great.
Just about a year and a half.
Okay. Thank
Very
you,
new
Bruce.
to the board.
Neil Score, this is I've been on the board for about 4.5 years, second term.
Okay. And you're the chair, right, Neil?
I am.
Great. Thank you.
I'm Kim Nelson, and I'm in my 4th term, or my 4th year of my 1st term, and then I served as an appointed school board member a few years ago before that for 1.5 years. So 6.5 years I've been on the board.
Thank you, Kim.
And I'm Angie Hoffman. I'm a board member. For about 1.5 years, I ran with Bruce and with Neil this last time.
Okay. Thank you, Angie.
Dennis is remote. Dennis, you want to introduce yourself?
Dennis Fieser, I'm the board treasurer, serving in my 4th year, and I'm kind of recycled back through. I served 3 terms about 20 some years ago.
Okay. Welcome back. Thank you, Dennis.
And Jill.
And Jill, Maureen is also here remotely.
Yes, Jill Marine. I'm in my 16th year.
Great. Nice to meet you, Jill. Thank you. And that is it for board members, correct?
I have one that is stuck in Minneapolis. He just texted me, but he will be here.
Okay. And what is his name?
Dave Clark.
Dave?
Yeah.
Okay.
ALATT.
All right. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Again, thanks for selecting MSBA to help with the superintendent search. We really appreciate it. I know there is a lot on your plate, and you made the decision last night after having read our proposal. So we're diving right into the planning meeting very, very quickly. So I want to thank everybody for their help. Kathy and Ashley especially have done a great job in the last week helping prepare the board in case you chose to move forward with MSBA and a search. So we're looking forward to working with you and really appreciate the chance to get started tonight. My name is Barb Doran. I'm the Director of Leadership Development and Executive Search at MSBA. I exclusively work on superintendent searches and superintendent evaluation, and it is a busy time right now, as you can well imagine, but I really enjoy the work that I get to do in working with school boards to find their next leader. Also with me as search lead for Albert Lee is Jeff Olson, so I'll turn it over to Jeff for a moment to introduce yourself as well.
Good evening, everybody. It's good to be with you remotely this evening. My name is Jeff Olson. My background is I spent 40 years in education, originally, all in the St. Peter public school system. I was a teacher, curriculum director, high school principal, served as a superintendent in St. Peter for 12 years. I retired in 2014, and like many retired superintendents, lasted about 2 months, and then started to work with the School Board Association as a consultant, primarily in the area of strategic planning, but also in the area of superintendent searches. In 2019-20, I came out of retirement and served as an interim year back in St. Peter. And this past year in 2020-2021, I was the interim executive director of the Minnesota Valley Education District. And this past year, I've been back working with MSBA on a number of superintendent searches. So looking forward to working with the Albert Lee School Board and the Albert Lee District in helping you to select your next superintendent.
Thank you, Jeff. And does everyone have a copy of the planning meeting packet? So we'll just get started with that agenda. I'm assuming you've got that and we can just begin. We're good? Okay, terrific. As far as review of the process, I'm going to very briefly touch on that. I'm not going to spend very long because I think the process itself will be explained as we work through the timeline and some other things in the packet tonight. There's two things I really want to share about the process. One is the importance of state statute. There's two state statutes that affect superintendent search, and that is the Open Meeting Law and the Data Practices Act. Now, they need to be balanced because you will, as a board, be discussing private data in a public meeting. Every single part of the superintendent search must be conducted in an open session. So that's where the open meeting law comes into play. The only time you as a board can close a meeting for anything relative to your superintendent is for the evaluation. And even in that case, if the superintendent wants it open, it must be open. But the search process is done in open session. Everything from any trainings that we do, along with the identification of your finalists and the interviews themselves, the deliberations after the interviews about who to move forward or who to hire, that's done in open session. Now, the reason it needs to be balanced is the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act requires that all of your applicant names are private data. So, for example, one of the hallmarks of MSBA's search process is we believe that the school board has the right to see all of the applicants for your position. So we'll be sharing with you all of the applications for the Albert Lea Superintendency. You will be keeping those very carefully protected because it's private data, reviewing them electronic on your own device or in the office of the district with hard copies, however you'd like to look at those. But because it's private data, when you come to the meeting where you name your finalists, you have to speak about these people as candidate A, candidate B, candidate C, and we'll guide you through that and make sure that we are keeping you in the lanes of state statute. But after you have, for instance, passed a motion to interview candidates B, C, and D, then for the very first time, we will read those names out loud of your finalists, because state statute says once they're named a finalist, then their name is public. But everybody else who applied for your job, their names remain private data forever. So there's a little bit of a dance between the Open Meeting Law and the Data Practices Act, but we'll make sure to walk you through that. So the importance of state statute really can't be overemphasized. And then the second piece I want to mention is that it's all about the board owning this process. This is going to be a search that fits Albert Lea. You know, you'll be able to make decisions that are very informed because we see MSBA's role as facilitating the process, providing as much information as you need in order to make those decisions. However, this is something that is up to you. We'll guide you, but we aren't going to lead it. We're going to make sure the board is comfortable leading it and making every decision along the way. So those are the two big things about the process I think are really important: state statute and board ownership. Other than that, I think it'll start to make sense when we start walking through some of the other pieces in the agenda tonight. But are there any questions around those two big areas relative to the superintendent search process from anybody? Okay, hearing none, we're going to jump into talking about the timeline. Now, at this point in the agenda, I'm actually going to mute my microphone and my audio or video, and I'm going to listen and take notes as Jeff facilitates this. He'll be leading the search for Albert Lea, but I want to take notes so I can start editing these documents while you're actually talking. So I'm here. Let me know if you have any questions or need anything, or I'll interrupt if I think there's something to add. But for the most part, I'm at this point simply going to turn it over to Jeff. So Jeff, it is all yours. Thank you, everybody.
All right, folks. So if you take a look at the agenda for this evening, what we're going to do is we're going to work our way through some of the logistics for the search, the timeline, the vacancy brochure. We're going to be talking about stakeholder input options, the role of the current superintendent, the school board spokesperson, in-district contact person, screening priorities, and talk a little bit about some potential additional services that the MSBA Search Service offers. But probably most importantly, we want to get started on the timeline. So if you would open your packet up to the section with the timeline, what we're going to do is try to identify dates that everybody can come to consensus with for those key steps that will be taking place in the search process. So those are all of those areas that are highlighted in yellow in your search timeline. So as you take a look at that search timeline, you can see that we're sitting on April 19th. That's the planning meeting. You'll have a stakeholder online survey that will be open April 21st through the 28th. There'll be a virtual information question and answer session hosted by MSBA at 4 p.m. on April 27th. The position will be posted between April 21st and May 10th. So now we get to that first yellow section that we need to identify. We're going to need to set a time of approximately 2 hours for interview training to discuss the stakeholder report, that's the survey results, to look at interview questions for the first round of the interviews, and to talk about interview procedures. So again, remembering what Barb talked about in terms of the open meeting law, these are open meetings that are posted, open to the public, so probably in your normal meeting spot, although sometimes boards choose to meet in different locations. It might be a media center at one of the school buildings or whatever the case might be. But we're looking at May 3rd, May 5th, or May 6th. So that's a Tuesday, a Thursday, or a Friday for a 2-hour meeting. And I will talk a little bit about that virtual part because I want to, perhaps give you a different opportunity there. So let's just turn it over maybe to Neil to have you facilitate looking at those dates, May 3rd, 5th, or 6th. Approximately 2-hour meeting for interview training and discuss the stakeholder report, interview questions and procedures. And just to note for all of you, sometimes that meeting can take a little bit longer. Sometimes it goes more quickly. But we generally set about 2 hours.
Are any of those dates problematic,
Not for me.
They're all fine for me.
Bruce?
I like Thursday.
Thursday.
Okay,
You really doesn't matter.
not Friday?
It really doesn't matter.
Might have baseball, one of those.
We can eat
will make it work.
Okay.
Oh, Jill.
Jill? Dennis, Jill? Any of those dates problematic? The,
No, they're okay.
any of the three? May 3rd, May 5th, or May 6th? Dennis?
The 3rd or the 5th is better than the 6th.
All right, the 5th is a Thursday. Would that be all right?
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Okay, we can tentatively set the 5th then.
Or you're going to set the 5th and time?
It's a 2-hour, probably 2-hour meeting. Would the 5 o'clock time, since that's when our meetings usually are, and it's potentially, or it is a public meeting. Public is used to 5 o'clock. Does that sound good?
Mhm.
All right, there it is.
Okay, and location? The meeting room you're in right now?
I prefer this site.
Yeah.
Kathy likes this site.
Yeah.
Same site?
Okay. And that just, if you, for Barb and my sake, what is the meeting location? What's the name of that room that you're in?
It's a Brookside building, Brookside Administrative Building, the boardroom. It's on the second floor. What's that room number?
Brookside Education Center, and then it is the boardroom. That is correct.
All right, very good. Thank you. So as we work our way down that timeline, you'll see the application deadline is May 10th. What will happen then is the MSBA team will conduct some screening, preliminary verification of references. We'll conduct a pre-interview of recommended applicants. You'll also have an opportunity then to, for each of you to review all of the applicants for the position. And then on either May 16th or 17th, so that's our next date, we would present to you the candidates that we would recommend you interview. But again, as Barb pointed out, this is a board process and a board decision. You may elect to accept those recommendations that we make. You might elect to interview other candidates as well. Again, generally that meeting, an hour and a half, possibly 2 hours, but really it's determining who your finalists are going to be. And by finalists, remember that's the individuals who will be interviewed for the position, and the first round interview candidates that you identify are considered finalists. And once they're identified, then their names become public. But prior to that, it all falls under the Data Practices Act. So we're looking at May 16th or May 17th And that's a Monday, Tuesday.
Yeah,
I
Jill,
would-
you have your-
I request
Jill.
Tuesday. I'm not available on Monday.
Well, Monday is problematic, I assume, because we have a board meeting scheduled on Monday, the 16th. So it looks like the 17th, the same arrangement as this week. We had a board meeting last night and a search meeting the following Tuesday, the day after. So let's look at the 17th, probably same time, same place.
Okay. That's good to go then.
Yep.
Then we're looking at first round interviews. And generally what we see is an average number would be 6 candidates interviewed. Sometimes boards elect to interview 7. Sometimes they elect to interview less than 6. So we would look at those first round interviews as being conducted in 2 evenings. And each interview is 1 hour in length. And then there's a 15-minute break between interviews. And sometimes, depending upon the number of interviews in a given evening, the board may take a break between the first 2 interviews and the third or whatever. But so generally, we would be looking at maybe 3.5 to 4 hours in each of those evenings. So again, depending upon the time, sometimes we see them starting at 4 o'clock. Sometimes they're at 4:30 or 5. But again, be thinking about the fact that if you have 2 evenings of interviews with maybe 3 people each night, as an example, you'd need about 3.5 to 4 hours. And then especially the second night, you'd need some time for deliberation to determine who you might move into the second round.
So the 19th, is that,
Thursday.
that's Thursday, and is that ALC graduation? And then the 20th is Albert Lee graduation, so we'd have to do the 23rd and 24th, right?
I believe you're correct. 23rd and 24th.
Okay. And would you be looking at potentially 5 o'clock, or would you look at starting a little bit earlier? Again, thinking about the fact that it's going to take about 3 to 4 hours.
Yeah.
Is that an open meeting?
It is an open meeting.
4 is fine.
4 o'clock?
Yeah.
4 o'clock.
Yeah. Jill's shaking her head, yes.
Jill, 4 o'clock? Very good.
Okay. And we'll provide you a draft schedule for each of those evenings as well. And that'll be part of our interview training meeting and procedures as we meet on May 5th. But we're looking at May 23rd and 24th. Now, looking at that, there generally is a need to have a little bit of a break between first and second rounds. We suggest that a board member or some process you use, we like to see the board members conduct reference checks prior to that second round of interviews. So you have another data point. What we have down then is the 25th or 26th. You're meeting the 23rd and 24th. It's probably a fairly tight turnaround to the 25th. If you could make the 26th work, that probably would be better. And generally, you're interviewing 2 to 3 candidates in that second round. But again, you're going to have a fairly tight turnaround for those reference checks on the 25th. So does the 26th work for everybody?
That'd be a Thursday.
Works for me.
Works for me.
Yeah.
Looks good.
Okay, and we'd probably identify that as 4 p.m. as well. Would that work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
And then how long does that one usually take?
2 hours.
2?
again, depending upon the number of, if you're interviewing 3 candidates, again, it's about an hour interview. That hour interview is a time for the candidate to respond to questions and an opportunity for the candidate to ask you questions. And then we generally have a 15-minute break between each of those interviews. And we'll talk more about that because we're asking you to fill out an online kind of assessment of the candidate's interview. And it takes a while for you to fill that out. So we're giving you about that 15-minute period in between. And then especially on that, on both of those evenings, right before you begin deliberation, our staff will need some time to put together the information that you send in online. So again, it's probably 3 to 4 hours. And again, that may depend on the amount of time you spend in deliberation, identifying in round 1 who will be moving on to round 2, and in round 2 who your lone finalist might be. And then we would start with, immediately the next day, the 27th, that's that next point down, where the board committee or designee begins negotiation of the employment contract. And then we would need to identify, but as long as we have this timeline out, a date where the board meets to approve the employment contract. And generally, when you've had an opportunity to think about the parameters of the contract, you would need, 3 to 4 days or so, maybe less, to negotiate a contract. But do you have any board meetings scheduled in early June?
6th,
Yes.
6th, probably.
6th?
So they are normally Monday night evenings and meetings, and with the holiday in there, we don't have one until that really first full week of June. But they
You'd have a
could
June.
schedule,
I think probably I think a June 6th would probably be fine.
That'd work. That's a scheduled meeting. 5 o'clock.
That's at your regularly scheduled meeting at 5
Yeah,
p.m.
5 o'clock, yeah.
Okay,
Remind me, what are we doing on the 6th? That's when we're.
That's when the.
that's
board
when you
will-
approve the employment contract for the next superintendent.
that last time I did section.
Okay, great work, you guys. Nice to work through that. So next, we're going to take a look at the vacancy brochure. And I'd like you to look at the first page in the upper left-hand section, where it starts by identifying Albert Lee area schools as located in South Central Minnesota. And then there are a number of what we would call points of pride. One of the things that we would like to have you think about is, are there any other points of pride that you would like to see included in that section? You'll see at the bottom there are a couple of bullets, TBD. So if there's something else that you think would be appropriate to have in that points of pride section, we'd like to hear about that. And if not, I mean, I think it looks really good as is, but again, you may have some things you'd like to add into that.
Yes.
One of the things when I was reviewing them that I thought we kind of stand out on is two specifically around special education. We're in a consortium with Austin School District. That's kind of unique. And then we also have done some restructuring of our special ed. And I don't know how you want to say that. Maybe Sheila could help with that. Like just really meeting the needs of our district as it relates to special education. And I think that because of the climate we're in with special education, that might be something that would be good to add. I don't know. I'm just wondering what you guys think.
It is an arrangement which is a definite plus for both Austin and Albert.
What do you think, Kathy? I don't.
Certainly, we could list the special education cooperative with Austin Public Schools. It's not on the Albert Lee campus. It is on the Austin, in the Austin community, but it is a joint board between the two units. But it's definitely a very important piece of our system. We don't list it as one of our schools because it's its own school district, but it is certainly something not unique, but important to our district.
So Kathy, something like meet the needs of special education students through joint programming with the Austin Public Schools? Is there a specific name of the district or the consortium?
Yeah.
Austin, Alberta Special Ed.
Yes, it's the Austin Albert Lee. I mean, it's a big, long name, but the Oakland Center, but it is the Albert Lee Austin Special Education Cooperative.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it is a long acronym.
What is it?
It's SPEC too.
It does have its own number, 6052. Yeah.
Kathy, could you maybe email that language to Barb?
Yeah.
One other, I don't know if it's significant or not, but the second item, bulleted item 218, advanced placement honor roll. In addition to that, we had a great attendance, a lot of students taking advantage of college in the schools programs. And maybe we could just put a comma after the roll, honor roll, and mention the CIS college in the school program. Very popular program. We have a lot of students that enter college halfway through their sophomore year.
Or so something like opportunity to earn college credit through a college in the school's concurrent enrollment program, something like that.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Large PSEO contingent.
Okay, very good. Anything else? If you turn the page then of the vacancy brochure to go to the second page, in the upper left-hand corner is what we refer to as the candidate profile. The Albert Lee Area School Board seeks a superintendent who, and then you see those TBDs. If you look on the next page, there is a survey, if you will, that says XYZ Public Schools Superintendent Qualifications. And it asks you to choose 6. So what we're going to do in the interest of time is ask all of you to, as board members, to complete that survey and then give it to, it would be either Ashley or Kathy, I'm not sure which of those folks would be responsible. And you could then fax those or scan those and send those to Barb so she can put together that candidate profile based on where there's consensus among the board members on those top 6 areas. Does that sound?
It's that one page?
It's that one page, yeah. The title of it is XYZ Public School Superintendent Qualification. And it says, read the list below, choose the 6 items you feel are the most important traits or skills the next superintendent must possess. So the first one is a people person with proven abilities in the human relations and communications. So once you all filled that out with the 6 that you choose, it quickly reaches a consensus among the board members as to what those superintendent qualifications are. And it's important. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I wondered if maybe Dennis and Jill could email their choices to me. You don't have to scan it if you don't want to, but if you, since you're remote, you won't be filling it out in person for Kathy or Ashley to be able to scan back to me. So if you could please find a way to email them to me or email them to Kathy or Ashley so we get your input as well. And if I could have all of that input by noon tomorrow, I'll be able to then load it into the brochure. So just want to make sure all the board members are able to participate if possible. All right, thank you.
What's the email?
You can send it to B Dorn, so B as in Barb, D as in dog, ORN as in Nancy, bdorn at mnmsba.org. Thank you, everybody.
MNSBA?
MSBA. Yep, Minnesota MSBA. So mnmsba.org.
Dennis, it is on the 3rd page of the document, the first document you have that you looked at to approve the search. Her email address is on the side there.
I got it.
Okay, so then that will help fill that candidate profile out, so that vacancy brochure with those additional points of pride, and we're going to have a couple of other items we're going to cover here, but it's important that that is able to be out there as the opening gets posted. And our timeline is, I believe that gets posted on the 21st of April. And that, so it's tight, but it's all doable. Also, as you look at that particular section of the vacancy brochure, you'll note that line at the bottom that says previous superintendent experience preferred but not required. That's also a spot on that qualification survey that we just looked at the very bottom, below question or below characteristic trait number 27. There's a statement that says, is it important that the next superintendent has previous experience as a superintendent? Yes, no. So again, you'll be able to identify that. We typically see in the vacancies we have out in front of us, that statement, previous superintendent experience preferred but not required. You could, for an example, have a very qualified candidate who's an assistant superintendent, a director of teaching and learning, HR, business services, or whatever, in a larger district that might end up being a good fit and a good candidate for your position. And if it's previous superintendent experience required, they may not apply. But again, that's something that will come out of that survey. Any thoughts or questions or comments on that particular item?
So Barb, when you get mine, I thought we might be discussing it, so I did like 12 of things that, you know, and so we could come to consensus. So you'll see 2 check marks on mine. And so it's the one on the shoulder or the top, my top 6.
Which ones are the top 6 duplicates?
Red.
Okay.
On the side of the document, not in the space, but on the side.
The red ones. Got it. Thank you.
Any other thoughts or questions on the candidate profile in the section on superintendent experience preferred but not required? Okay, well, the next point we want to move to then is on the salary verbiage, and that's right next to that on that candidate profile in the upper right-hand corner of page 2 where it says salary and benefits. Now, if you look at the page right after the Superintendent Qualifications Survey, you will see that there are 4 salary language options. The first one is the current superintendent's base salary for the 2021-2020 school year is, and you would list that salary. The second option is to say a competitive compensation package with a minimum salary of blank will be negotiated, again, commensurate with experience and qualifications. The third would be competitive compensation package with a salary range of blank to blank. And the final would be a comprehensive compensation package will be negotiated commensurate with experience and qualifications. And in all of those, the contract length is negotiable as provided in Minnesota statute. And the maximum number of years under Minnesota statute for a superintendent contract is 3. We typically have seen in most of our vacancies this year that first option, the current superintendent's base salary is whatever it is. And the reason I think that's a good option, but again, you may choose another, is that's factual. That's what the current superintendent is making. That gives a picture of what the superintendent in the Albert Lee School District might be making. Now, we realize that with Superintendent Funk, he's been the superintendent for, is it 13 years in Albert Lee, approximately?
Yeah.
So again, sometimes that question is, yeah, but he's been here for a long time and you know, he's sort of earned that salary. And I think most candidates understand that. If you have a minimum salary, sometimes someone might say, I don't know if I'm going to apply if that's the minimum salary. And if you have a salary range, you could potentially box yourself in depending upon whomever that candidate might be. But again, this is your decision. So thoughts you have on the vacancy brochure, salary language options. And before we kind of open that up, I always like to mention, I mean, there are a whole lot of other factors in a contract besides salary that are important. Not the least of which would be, what's the health and hospitalization insurance benefit? Is that a single? Is that a dollar amount? Is that full family? The number of days worked, the number of vacation days, the number of sick days, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really salary, insurance, and time. Those are probably the three biggest variables. But that being said, thoughts, ideas, questions about salary language options?
So we are to come to a consensus on one of those four as a group tonight. This is not something we individually do, correct?
If we can have you come to a consensus this evening on one of those four, because that will be important to have that posted in the vacancy brochure that will be going out as a position gets posted on Thursday.
Personally, I like the first and the last. I understand the logic with the first. Appreciate your comment to the effect that an applicant probably would not expect the same salary unless they had similar experience or longevity someplace.
If they find that online, they can find his salary online too, if they want to look,
True.
you know.
I suppose. What's the average salary for superintendent in Minnesota? Is that known?
Different.
It really depends on the size of the district, the length of time in service. The one thing I think we would say is it's a competitive world out there. So, you know, you're seeing those salaries, they're going up as people are moving from position to position. So do you have that current salary? Anybody have that right off the top?
It would be hard to look up.
I'll look it up here.
Okay.
I like the last one, like you said too.
Do you think candidates would be turned off by the last option? Because that's probably the most accurate description of anybody's situation. When you hire somebody, the salary is usually negotiable. And I like the first because it's completely objective.
I like the last option.
Okay. Dave,
I like the last option.
Kim,
Well, I didn't necessarily like the first option, but I think it also shows that maybe some commitment on our part, which we go on to say that it's negotiated. So we really say the same thing in the last one. We just are showing that, but like you said, he can see it online, so. Or he or she or candidate can see it online, so.
Jill, what are your thoughts?
I would be okay with the first or last as well. I understand the logic on the first, and I do believe our salary is generous for our school size, so I'm fine with either of those.
Dennis?
Again, the first or the last, probably the last one more so, because if we get somebody with not a lot of experience and then we throw out a package that's quite a bit less than what Dr. Funk is making, you know, I just don't want somebody coming in and saying, well, this is what Dr. Funk made, that's what I should get. But the last one probably gives us a little more flexibility. And like you said, they can look online to see what they want.
Okay with that.
Angie?
I'm where you guys are at. I'm fine with the first one or the last ones. The ones in the middle, I think, could limit people who apply. So first or last.
We're leaning towards the last one. People were definite on the last.
Yeah, I have about equal preference for each of those, and it would be nice if, although I'm sure, as Dave indicated, any candidate that has capabilities that would be connected to this position ought to have enough sense to be able to check what our current salary for our superintendent is. So I guess probably I would, it would be nice if we could, give them directions to discover what we are currently paying our superintendent, but I suppose that'd be a little tacky.
So 21-22 is $183,529.
And I don't know, Barb, if we've seen the comparatives in, let's say, the Big Nine Conference. I would say that's probably in the upper middle of the Big Nine. Would that be
I
accurate?
think so. We haven't seen that. I know we did the Austin search 2 years ago and they had the Big Nine data specifically around benefits. Their HR person had that. I don't know if they still do that. Another easy way to find out is just to make some phone calls to your neighboring districts in the Big Nine and ask them what's the salary listed in the current superintendent's contract. It's very easy to gather and they'll share it with you. But right off the top of our heads, no, we don't know right off the bat what that is. So
I've done this. You can visit every district's website and it's public information. It's usually public under the Human Services part.
I will see what the last data I have and pull that. I mean, we have data from a year ago or from the fall. I'm not sure it was up to date for all, but I'll see if I can pull that.
If we did go with the first option, would it make sense to list how many years our current superintendent has been here? It wouldn't.
Kind of muddy it up, but
Yeah. It'd be just as muddy as suggesting somebody could look up the salary. Sounds like we're leaning a little bit in the direction of the fourth option.
Yes.
Okay.
Kim, you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Jill, you okay with that? Dennis? I think you are in the, all right. Number 4.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So that's really going to help us on that vacancy brochure. And just the last point I just want to make at the bottom of the second page of the vacancy brochure, just note my contact information. You have my cell phone and my email there. Again, anytime any of you may have any questions about the process, the procedure, certainly don't hesitate to connect with me. Text message or phone probably get me responding more quickly than an email would, but I do check my email on a regular basis as well. So the next section is we're going to move into the stakeholder input, and you will see the next item in your packet is the superintendent search survey. That survey is the survey that we use pretty consistently with all of the superintendent searches. You'll also note that that survey is in Spanish. And so that idea is that survey will be going out as soon as we possibly can get that noted, April 21st through April 28th. So it's a fairly tight time frame. And I think it'll be important to identify whatever method you typically identify to let your stakeholders know that there's a survey open, whether you have something that might go out to parents, to community members, to staff, et cetera, et cetera. Generally, what we've seen, and it's kind of a wonky statistic, but the average number of survey responses end up being about 12% of your student enrollment. So given that, you would be looking at somewhere between 300 and 400 survey responses. That, if you got that number, that would be what we would see as kind of an average survey response rate. One of the important things that then happens is once the survey is completed, the MSBA staff will review that and create a synopsis of the survey, including the top traits, skills, and abilities that the survey respondents indicate are important for the superintendent. And you can note that in terms of areas of expertise, in terms of most important traits or skills. And then there also is a section there of the top 6 personal characteristics, things like confident, creative, etc. And then what are some of the good things taking place in the Albert Lea schools today? And a couple of other open-ended questions as well around what do you see ahead for the district over the next 5 years? What does a new superintendent need to know about the history of the school district and community to be successful? And again, we'll identify some themes on those open-ended responses that will provide some sort of big ideas or general statements. And you'll get that information when we go through the interview training on, I believe that date we identified was May 5th. So questions you might have on the qualifications survey?
How are these surveys distributed? Through the mail? I would assume.
They would be distributed through your normal channels. Generally, it's electronic, but we do suggest that you have paper copies available through your school district for anybody that would be looking for a paper copy. We typically don't see very many paper copies filled out. Most of the survey responses come in electronically. And again, you've probably had experience in putting out surveys of this sort in a variety of different formats, over the past years.
Who's responsible for facilitating that distribution? Do we do that, or do they do that?
Barb?
I can chime in on this one. Thank you so much for asking that. Tomorrow, I'll be sending a communications piece to Ashley, and I'll copy Kathy on it. And it's a simple piece that explains, it's kind of a press release-ish kind of thing that says, here's the survey opportunity, here's the link, click here to take the survey. It's open from this date to this date. Also in that communications piece, we'll say there's a Q&A coming up next week with MSBA. If you have any questions about the search process, they will answer them. You can submit questions in advance or attend the session live on whatever date we said the Q&A would be. We do all the work on the Q&A on our end with the Zoom link. We'll set it up. I'll get that link to Ashley when the time comes. But that communications piece tomorrow will go to the district, and I'll copy Neil, you as board chair. And then you can copy and paste that verbiage into an email, maybe Ashley, out to your distribution groups, parents, staff. You can send a press release to the paper if you want. You should put the link on the district website for sure, so people can just go to the website and click on the link. Any way you might want to get that link in front of people. And we always tell folks there's hard copies at the district office, as Jeff said, for anyone who wants to fill it out by pen and paper. So that'll happen tomorrow. There'll be some more information coming, and it does get set up on the district's end, that sort of thing.
Barb, we will typically, we use Blackboard Messenger to send a text message to all our families, parents, and say, check your email. There's a link there. And then we have a pop-up on our webpage that we can leave there for a number of days. We have a news section, and we're building the superintendent search page as we go. So we will take, well, Ashley will take care of that. We'll work that out. Yeah.
That's perfect. That sounds absolutely perfect. You'll get the word out to as many people as possible so they can fill it out, and we can get that report back to you. So terrific. Thank you very much. Look for that from me tomorrow, okay?
Thank you.
Yeah, Kim.
Go ahead.
Kim has a question.
Okay, so I might have missed it, but the April 27th, that's the Q&A. Do board members attend that? That makes sense, or?
Yeah, you do not need to attend that. In fact, we usually have, we've had some trouble finding the perfect time for a Q&A because people are so busy. So trying to come to the Q&A live is a challenge for just about everybody. So we have found the sweet spot to be about 3 or 4 o'clock on a weekday afternoon. A lot of people who want to come are staff, and so they've finished their teaching day at that point, so they might log in live. But the vast majority of people will watch it on the recording. So that's why we want to have the opportunity for questions in advance to make sure I answer those during the Q&A session. And then anyone who happens to be joining us live could type in questions to the chat box and we'll answer them during the live session. But no matter what, we record it. The next day I send that recording link to Ashley so she can put it on the website. And then it goes there and it stays on there throughout the entire duration of the search. But you do not have to attend that. However, I would strongly encourage board members to watch it at a later time because you'll want to know what we've said so that we're all on the same page. So we answer questions that your stakeholders have about the search. And so you'll want to know what we said. So if you get asked in the grocery store, you can say the same thing that MSBA has said. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Yep.
I was just wondering if there's a link on our website or that goes out in an email. Is there anything that would stop people from filling the survey out multiple times, or people from other areas of the world filling it out, something like that?
I'll take that as well. That's a great question. It identifies IP addresses. So whatever your email address is, it'll recognize it, and you cannot take it more than once from that email address. Occasionally we have people, because you self-identify, as you can see on here, the first question is, are you a parent guardian? Are you a staff member? Are you a community member? People can sometimes take it twice because they say, okay, I'm answering it this time as a parent, and then I'm answering it from my work email as a staff person. And that's okay because we have multiple identities when we're filling these out, but most people take it once. I always get asked about the what would be the word, the security around the survey. Can someone around the world take it, or someone in a neighboring district? The answer is yes. It may happen, but it happens so infrequently. We're expecting hundreds of responses from Albert Lee. And so if there are a couple of people who take it and they live in, I don't know, the Northwoods or Rochester or North Dakota, it's going to get so diluted that the actual stakeholders of Albert Lee will have by far the overwhelming voice. But we don't have any kind of parameters on it so that people can't take it. We just haven't found it to be a problem. Does that help?
Thank you.
Okay.
Other questions from anybody around the qualification survey? So let's move to the finalist interview. A lot of times there are questions about the stakeholder input around finalist interviews. And typically what we would see is there are three practices that have been primarily used among school districts. The one that we're seeing most often, I would say by far, and Barb could chime in on this as well, is that the school board uses the survey results as the stakeholder input area for providing a data point about your decision on whom you're going to move forward into second round interviews and to whom you're going to make as the lone finalist and begin contract negotiations with. I think Barb has talked about this a number of times, and I've seen this as well. The people are used to surveys and doing more work online, probably from the pandemic. But the other piece behind that is everybody's on an equal footing when you have that survey result. You haven't given any extra time or attention to a particular individual or individuals who might participate in another way in the process. But we do see two other ways that there is stakeholder input in that finalist interview. One is what we would call audience input. And in the audience input option, you would identify as a school board or a district somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to maybe 12 people who would sit in on, primarily it's the second round of interviews, observe the school board conducting the interviews of the candidates, and then they would have an electronic form that they would fill out that would go to MSBA and get analyzed and sent back to the board to consider. And really what the audience input form is all about is, what are those 10 to 12 people who are sitting in the audience watching the interview that you're conducting see as the strengths of the candidates, and what do they see as the opportunities for improvement? And really the focus tends to be on the strengths of the candidates. The third option, and one that we really see pretty infrequently in the past year plus, is an additional committee where there might be a committee of other stakeholders who are conducting a second interview in a different site than where you're conducting your interview. And then those results are, again, brought forward to the board to receive as input before you make your decision on identifying folks for the second round or identifying the lone finalists. One of the potential drawbacks for an additional committee is if they end up coming down on a candidate that you don't select, you might be ending up with some questions about what did you even ask us for if you didn't take our advice. And really, I think one of the important points that we would make from the MSBA process is this is really the board's decision. Probably one of the most important decisions that you will make as a school board and that you're elected to make is who's going to lead the district as the next superintendent. So those are the three primary methods that we've looked at. What are your thoughts on those options or questions?
If I could say, I am not in favor of an extra committee. I don't think we have time, and it's easier just to move ahead.
I would agree with that, and I think the survey piece, I would agree with you that I think that's the equity piece of people having input on the same level, so.
I agree with the comment about the extra committee. That would be probably mostly cosmetic, something that we would do to create the impression that we were vigorously over and above soliciting information from outside sources, and this is our responsibility mostly.
I agree with Jill. We got the survey. The community's got the survey to fill out that we should get their feedback from that.
I would echo that. The information, if the survey comes in with a good response, we're going to have a lot of quality data that we need, that we can ask of the candidates. And because of the tight time frame, I think the tighter we keep it, the better.
Okay, well, that's as we lay out the process, unless we hear something different, that's how we'll begin moving forward. And again, we'll have some draft interview schedules, et cetera, when we go through that interview training meeting on May 5th with you. So let's next move to the role of the current superintendent. Generally, what we see is the role of the current superintendent is the current superintendent is not involved in the process, other than the superintendent may be available to answer a question from a potential candidate, about something specific to the district or specific to something that's going on in the district. Different thoughts there?
I'm in agreement with that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. School board spokesperson, generally, Neil, that's you. Usually it's the board chair who is the school board spokesperson, unless you have a different thought around that one.
Well, unless the board has an issue with that, I have no problem with it. I would add that I would certainly respond to input that I get from individual board members, and as spokesperson would include their thoughts into my comments. So yeah, if no one has any problem with that. I can do this. Aye.
No.
Jill's shaking her head.
That would be aye.
Okay. In-district contact person, that's a person who I would primarily be connecting with on a fairly regular basis as things start heating up around this process in terms of getting information out, agendas out, packets to board members. Would that be Ashley?
Yes. Ashley, you know, she's probably the most steady one in the office at all times, and she is the exec admin assistant to the board, and otherwise, she knows where to find me if she needs additional support. So I unless the board has any questions about that.
So for Jeff, that would be an Ashley/Kathy.
Sure.
Okay. We do want to just identify a couple of things you'll see on the search agreement, additional services. And I'm just going to step through each of those. The first one is attached under stakeholder input, page 3. There's an opportunity to have focus groups. We do not see focus groups used very often, and I think based on what I heard you talking about in terms of using the survey, that's kind of what I'm hearing. We probably would not do anything around focus groups. And again, I appreciate what a number of you have said, kind of given the timeline, that would be pretty difficult to move into it. But we do want to make sure that we just note that.
Noted.
All right, page 9, in-district meetings. So this first meeting is virtual. Normally Barb and or I, or both of us would be there in person for the planning meeting, kind of with the tight turnaround from last night to tonight that got problematic. So what I would indicate to you is that I would plan on being in person with you at your interview training meeting on May 5th. And that would not be at an additional charge. That would be in place of the planning meeting. If you wanted somebody in person then for the candidate selection meeting on May 17th, right now that's scheduled to be virtual. There would be an additional charge for that if you wanted to do that. Again, that's up to you. I think that candidate selection meeting can work very well virtually, but thoughts?
How are you seeing that being done in other districts that you've worked with?
Usually that meeting's virtual and it works just fine. And then I'm in person with you on all of the interview, first round, second round interview dates. So I'd be there May 5th and then for first and second round interviews with you. And there would not be an additional charge to any of those pieces.
So just, I watched a couple of these meetings that you've done, and I did not find any questions, and I was new to that process. I did not find anything so problematic that you would need to be in-house. But Barb did the ones I watched, so I'm assuming Jeff will do just as well. They were very well done. I didn't see any problem with that, so.
I think that's a good plan.
Yes, we would be in favor of those recommendations.
Okay, so then you go to national advertising on page 10. There are some, a few districts who want that position to be advertised nationally. But again, we see very few that do that. The online application system that MSBA uses is called Revelis. And Revelis does have a presence in a number of states, so it's larger than just this area. But quite frankly, I think you have a pretty attractive position in school district. There are people who are probably already looking for this position to be posted. And you know, it's advertised heavily through MSBA, through the Minnesota Association of School Administrators, which is a superintendent's organization. It's on EdPost. People know where to look for those application, directions. So again, that's up to you, but we don't see that very often.
I would concur with that. I don't think not advertising nationally would exclude candidates from outside of Minnesota.
I don't see it excluded.
No.
Okay, so then the final piece there is on the background checks. So what will end up happening is when you select particularly the people to be interviewed, we will have gone through a reference check process with them and done some other background information. Districts all have their own criminal background check procedures that are in place for candidates. The one piece that we do sometimes see is the background check after the lone finalist is identified. And again, that's up to you. The piece that's in place with the background check that probably is different than your normal criminal background check procedures, and I don't know what what company or group you use for that, is that this background check procedure also verifies employment and educational credentials. So somebody could put on a resume, for an example, a PhD from Indiana State University. This process would verify that the individual candidate actually does have a PhD from Indiana State University. But again, that's up to you. And that would be an additional cost of $395. And we would typically see that used for the one lone finalist prior to their having an employment contract approved by you on, I think your date was June 6th. Thoughts there?
I think we have unanimous consensus on that one.
We'd like to move forward with that.
Yes.
MSBA does the check on the finalists. Is that correct?
Through
Background
this,
check?
through that background study.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
So I just want to be real quick to be clear. We do reference checking. We make a lot of phone calls, but the only sort of verifiable background check is the good hire one, if you'd like that done, but you don't have to. And then the district background check that you do on every single employee. It's like a $15 standard check. So our background check is checking references and doing a social media sweep and things like that. But if you're looking for something that has some official stamp on it, it would be the good hire background check if you want that. And I think we have probably 25% of our districts do the background check on that last person, but not everybody does. That's your call.
Yeah,
And that's the $395 cost.
Correct.
Right.
Do you see the value in that? I mean, have you caught in things by using it to say, hey, it's a good thing we checked it, or?
We have not, because the candidates that we're seeing retained by districts this year have not had anything slip through per se. But again, there's always candidates that for some reason or another claim something that's not correct. We do have districts that usually really want to do it if they've been burned before, where they thought someone had a PhD or worked at MIT and it turns out they didn't. And then in hindsight, they wish they'd done it. So they're extra cautious and very proactive about a background check. Otherwise, the majority of districts we work with rely on the district standard employment background check. But this is an option because not every district wants it. We don't want to build it into our fee. It's always something, if you want it done, we will do it without question. But we haven't, quote, caught anybody lying on their resume, but the possibility, I guess, is always there.
Do we have to say yes or no right now, or can we wait till the process goes along and say, hey,
Yep.
maybe it would be prudent to do it?
You can take a look at your applications, and once you've even identified your finalists and you have 5 or 6 people you might want to interview, you might at that point decide, yeah, we're going to go ahead with one. We had one district that wanted it done on all 3 of the finalists before the round 2 interviews. So they had to build in a week to a week and a half between round 1 and round 2, because this is a 5 to 7 day process. You don't have that. You have 1 day between round 1 and round 2. So you can't do it on your 3 finalists. You could do it on all 6 of them maybe, although that's pretty tight too. So most, if they do it, are doing it on that last person. But yeah, you can wait and decide later, as long as it doesn't fall off your radar. You want to remember, and Jeff will remind you that you need to decide on it if you don't want to vote tonight.
I think the speed we're doing the search with, we need that. We need that background check.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think the community would appreciate that also.
And that $395 against our total budget is not going to kill us.
Really money well spent.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the one piece we're going to be adding into the additional services, correct?
Yes.
All right. The last item we want to move to then are the 2 screening priorities for the district, and that should be the last handout that you have in your packet. The document is titled 2 Screening Priorities, and in parens it says Sample Application Questions. So this is, again, something that will help you in screening applicants, and quite frankly, it helps the School Board Association MSBA team in screening applicants. So what happens is in the Revelis application system, there are 3 questions that are asked on the application that the candidate responds to in writing. And you'll be able to see that written response. One of the questions of the 3 will be, having read the leadership profile for the vacancy announcement, please explain why you feel you are a match for this school district. So that's one of the questions that will be out there. But there are 2 additional questions that you can identify that would be in that Revelis application system. And if you look at the words and phrases that are highlighted in yellow, those might get you to be thinking about a couple of areas that you might be interested in. You might have other areas as well. These are the areas we typically see. So we would really like tonight to be able to get you to come to consensus on 2 additional kind of prompts or responses for that Revelis application. So I'll just stop there. See, number 1, do you have any questions? Or number 2, anybody want to take a shot at any of those that you think you would like to see on the application process?
I like the finance part. Their experience with finances, school district finance, number 5.
I like number 6 about building a successful administrative team.
Who do I?
I would agree with that, certainly number 6, and I haven't finished.
I like number 10. The future of education. It looks different for us. I like that one too.
Or you know, 10 is so similar to strategic planning. I think getting some sense of ability to look ahead with changes in education, with curriculum and those pieces, that strategic planning might roll in a bunch of those together.
Into 10? Is that what you're saying, Dennis? 10 is sort of an umbrella that includes all of them?
Number 8.
Future planning is the generalization of the other items.
That was kind of, as I looked at it quickly, that was my thought.
So 5 and 8 maybe.
Yeah, well, we could argue all night on.
Yeah,
I think
they're all
probably-
good.
They're all good, and
Well, and let me, excuse me, folks, but let me also point out that you're going to have the ability to cover some of these areas in your round 1 and round 2 interview questions as well. So
Right.
this is one that kind of gives you that, just to help you as you're looking at all of these applicants and you're reading their responses, you're saying, you know what, this person seems like they really got a good handle on an area that's important to us. So it could be broader in scope. You can get into some specific areas as well in those interview questions.
Building a successful administrative team, I think, is going to be key, like everybody said.
Am I hearing 6 as one that you would move forward?
yeah, and then we're kind of torn between the areas of finances and planning for the future, curriculum, all of those others that could be lumped under one category. Finances is pretty critical, I think. And
Send a message anyway.
yeah, and I would be okay with 5 and 6. If I had to choose, I'd probably pick 5 and 6.
So would I.
I'm good with
I
those.
can live with that.
Okay, and that doesn't exclude any of the others in our interrogation of the candidates.
Just so to kind of provide a little background, when I meet with you on May 5th, we will have prepared a draft set of questions, and those questions will be identified based on what you have as your candidate profile in your vacancy brochure and what the results of the stakeholder survey are. So we'll try to craft questions that fit into those. Again, those will just be recommended questions. You may like them, you might want to modify them, you might want to add some additional questions. But oftentimes there would be, questions about strategic planning, future of education, et cetera, et cetera. But you'll have an opportunity to get those questions in advance of that meeting on May 5th and be thinking about if those make sense or if there's some other areas you want to look at. So what I'm hearing is we're going to have the two screening priorities, number 5 and number 6, that will be in addition to the prompt about having read the leadership profile for this vacancy, why do you feel you're a good match?
And that first one would incorporate a lot of the general areas where we feel that we have a consensus about what we're looking for in superintendent.
Exactly. All right, well, that takes us through that process. I just want to, before I open it up to any last questions, thank you for your time and attention and detail to moving this process along. Just to note, we're going to be having an interview training meeting on May 5th at 5 p.m. at the Brookside Education Center in the boardroom. And then the board will meet to determine finalists on May 17th. That meeting will be on our part virtually, but again, that'll be at the same location. Then you have your first round interviews on May 23rd and 24th, beginning at 4 p.m. and your second round interview on May 26th at 4 p.m. The board committee or designee begins negotiations of the employment contract. I do want to make just a couple of comments about that. One of the things that is important to note is if you have a board committee that conducts the negotiations process, all of those meetings need to be posted, and they are open meetings then because you've got a committee of the board conducting negotiations. So sometimes what we see is an individual board member, sometimes the board chair, sometimes it might be somebody else, is tasked with negotiating the contract, but that the board has set parameters for negotiations in advance. So that might be something that you want to think about. And just as a reminder, you cannot close a board meeting to discuss employment contract negotiation strategies for the superintendent. You can do that for other groups. But you might want to be thinking about getting together, whether you have a negotiations committee or some other committee or a full board and a board meeting or a study session. How are you going to be looking at kind of the contract parameters? And you probably start with using your current contract. There also will be a model contract that we'll have available for you, but that might be something, again, given kind of the tight time frame, that you might want to take a look at and think about, shortly.
It'd be appropriate to pursue the same arrangement that we have in negotiating with other units, our bargaining units, which would consist of Kathy, our director of finances, and I happen to be on that committee also, one board member. Does that make sense?
You'd be good with that.
Under the guidance of the previous, input from the board in terms of what parameters we have available. Would that work? And that meeting, then that session with our negotiations group, Kathy, Jen, and I, would not be public, correct?
Jeff, what's your thought on that? Is that a public meeting if it's our typical negotiations team with teachers, paras, et cetera?
No, I don't think so, as long as it's not a committee of the board that's a part of that. Barb can jump into that one as well, but you'd need to have, you know, 2 or more members of the board, then it would be constitute a board committee. But an
Right.
individual board member sitting as a part of the negotiations team, I do not believe that that would be a public meeting.
Jill has a comment. Jill?
Yes, thank you. So if we do the one board member, like you've just stated, Neil, we just need to make sure that we're not having any kind of serial communications going on. We cannot be kind of polling the board about anything or kind of answering, kind of having a meeting one by one without actually meeting together. We don't want to violate any open meeting laws in that process either.
Or be it for me to do such a thing.
I understand. I just want everybody to be aware that we need to be careful with that, as with any issue, not just this one.
Yeah, good point.
That's exactly why we don't respond to all on any email communication.
And this would also this also applies to phone calls and texts, not just emails.
Very good, thank you. And that would be the case.
So is it the idea then on what, if we want input on negotiation, we would have that at a study session that's already prior to, or a meeting that's prior to that time?
Correct. You could have that as a study session topic. You could have it as a part of a regular board meeting under an informational item, whatever, you know, whatever normal process you might use where you haven't closed a meeting to discuss kind of negotiation strategy.
Then I would assume that once the committee, which consists of 3 people, I being the only board member, then after if we have a tentative agreement with the candidate, we would report back to the board as a whole. The only difference being with other units, we generally do that in a closed session. In this case, it would be an open session.
Right. And if you're thinking you've got a fairly tight time frame, May 27th and, and June 6th, if you're going to have a board session between there to lay out the contract parameters, you'd need to make sure you have that meeting posted with 72 hours notice, 3 days notice.
I don't think that'd be a problem.
Okay. So any final questions from anybody or comments?
Jeff, would it be appropriate on that May 5th interview training meeting to set some time aside at the end of the meeting for the board to review the current contract and then review the model MSBA contract? And would that be?
That'd be a great time to do that.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And we can, and as I lay that agenda out, you can make sure that, keep me on top of that, but I'll make a note of that. We will make sure that in that interview training, part of the packet that we present you, you will have the MSBA MASA model contract in there. But then you might also want to have the current contract available for your review. And typically in that a contract for a superintendent that has been in the district for a number of years, you will have seen some things that may not be in an initial employment contract.
Right, and that is the case with us.
So Jeff, quick question for you on the 17th, when we're determining finalists. I know it's a public process, but are the initial applications all blind applications? And then once you decide on the 6 finalists, then that becomes public? Or if they're all public with names right away, then that means everything is public if we decide or not. So how does that work?
So they are considered private data, and this becomes a little bit. It'd be very important. We'll talk about that again in interview training. You'll need to refer to the candidates that you're discussing, who you're considering to interview, as candidate A, candidate B, candidate X, etc. Once you've identified that you're going to interview candidate A, candidate B, candidate X, then you've, as a board, have made a motion and approved that motion. Then those names are public. Then you'll identify those names. And as soon as possible after that meeting, I'll be in contact with them, to identify the fact that they're being identified for first round interviews. And with social media, they sometimes know it a lot sooner than I can even connect with them.
If I could add something to that also then, for that meeting, you will not be bringing the packets of information into the boardroom. We don't want anything printed from those applications. You'll be reviewing the applications electronically beginning May 12th. So no one's going to print them and bring them into the meeting. If you want to look at them in hard copy, I think I mentioned earlier, someone in the district office, Ashley, would make one set of copies to keep in the district office, and you go there and look at them and leave them there. You can't take them with you. But we will provide, if you'd like, redacted resumes for that meeting of the applicants for the candidate presentation on May 17th. We can redact all of the applicant resumes and call them candidate A, candidate B, candidate C. And then anyone who wants to see the resumes of the applicants can. However, they're probably 90 to 95% redacted. You can't tell anything about these folks from those resumes, but those would be available if folks would like them. And then the one thing that sometimes people don't know about the resumes is even once you've named your finalist, their names are public, of course. If people want to see the resumes of the finalists that are now their names are public, some of the data on those applications is still considered private data on the resume by state law. So we can do a redact light, I call it. But most folks, once you've named 6 finalists, they'll get a lot more information on those folks by going to LinkedIn. But we still could provide resumes for the finalists, but they also will be lightly redacted. So we can provide that, but we don't want you bringing these applications into the board meeting that night to discuss for that very, very reason. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
One thing I'm going to update on the timeline, excuse me, before I forget, because you're talking about the contract where it says May 26th, you would begin negotiations. I'm going to remove that red line below that says time to be determined if it's a special meeting for a committee. I'm going to take that out. And then on the right side, I'll remove the word committee or, the words committee or. So now it will say board designee begins negotiations of employment contract because you've got one board member working on it. So I'm going to change that a little bit on your timeline. And then I'm going to make a couple of quick comments. I need to duck off here at 6:30, but the one thing I want to say is please don't forget to send me the hiring criteria by noon tomorrow. Please take that XYZ survey. You can pick 6, scan them back to me or email them to me, whatever's best, because after 12 o'clock tomorrow, whatever I've got is what I'll put in the brochure. And then either Jeff or I will send the board the final brochure and final timeline for one set of eyes or one more time to have your set of eyes on it. If we don't hear from anybody by tomorrow night, probably by 6 or 7 o'clock, first thing Thursday morning, that brochure will go live on all of the sites we were talking about. So you'll have till tomorrow evening to make any edits or changes. And let's see what else. Hiring criteria, final brochure and timeline. I'll have stakeholder survey information tomorrow to Ashley and Kathy to distribute and get ready to post. It doesn't go live until Thursday. So you've got all day tomorrow to do some of the coordination of the ways of distributing the link like you were talking about earlier. And I wanted to do a quick shout out to Ashley and Kathy. They've been absolutely terrific to work with. You had a lot of information already in your brochure because of what they gathered and sent my way so I could create this brochure. So we really did hit the ground running in large part to them. So thank you to both of you for your help with that. I appreciate it. So is there anything else for me before I do duck off at 6:30? Jeff's going to wrap up, but you got a lot done tonight. Really nice job. Anything for me? Okay. Not hearing it, I'm going to sign off. So thank you very much, Jeff. I'm going to leave them with you. And please reach out if you have any questions. Okay, everybody? Thank you and take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. So we'll just wrap up here to see if you have any last questions. The one last comment that I'll make is you've got a fairly tight timeline here. What will happen now is, it's going to be quiet for about a week to 10 days. I mean, the survey is going to be out there. The Q&A will be occurring. The application window will be opened up. But then, once we get to May 5th, you start getting candidates, applications to review, and then we're hitting that mid-May timeframe. Things are going to move pretty quickly. And I want to thank you for your commitment to this process. you're making a lot of a major time commitment, but as we said, this is probably one of the most important decisions a school board will make. So any last questions for me?
I have one from a community member I talked to earlier today. Do you guys recommend, I know we have next to no time, but do you recommend ever the board members go to the schools or the communities of these applicants or not?
You know, we typically, that, I would say 15, 20 years ago, that was a fairly common process to do site visits because you're trying to, you know, figure out if there's a there, you know, if there's something else there. We typically don't see that now because the process is so open. There's so much information you see on social media that we typically don't see that happen. But then the other piece I would say is the time frame from when you would be able to go conduct a visit to identifying a second round and identifying a lone finalist probably isn't there.
But if we happen to know somebody that is very familiar with the candidate, phone calls, things like that, would that be appropriate?
I think you'd have to be careful that you have the same. So one of the pieces we didn't talk about, we'll talk about in interview training, is when you finish with usually it's after the first round prior to the second round, and there's only a day in there. And we're going to ask one of the board members, and oftentimes that could be the board chair, doesn't necessarily have to be, to conduct the reference checks. And so it's important that the same questions are asked of people and that one person is perhaps getting that information. So you're getting kind of it in the same lens, and then you report that back to the board as a, another data piece. So you have your survey of all of your constituents, your stakeholders. You'll have that reference check data, and most importantly, you'll have your own particular analysis of each candidate based on what you hear during those interview processes. So it gets a little bit questionable, I think, if you have individual board members reaching out to individual communities or individuals in communities or school districts. They may reach out to you as well, and I think you've got to be just a little bit careful about that information because sometimes there are people who have different reasons for communicating stuff to you.
Yeah, well, I suppose the reason that I'm asking is I've been involved in coaching for a long time, and I probably know just about every coach in the state of Minnesota in a particular sport. So I'm just curious, not that I'm eager to pursue that course, but if it presents itself, it might be better for me to abstain from that activity.
I would recommend that, and because you're then going to, whomever is going to be conducting the reference checks, you're going to be talking to references. And one of the things that we suggest, and again, kind of jumping a little bit into the interview training meeting, but that's okay, is that you really talk to someone who is a school board member who is directly responsible for the hiring and dismissal or non-renewal of a contract of a particular individual, or if they don't have that, their direct supervisor. So even if that isn't a reference that's listed, we still suggest you connect with those folks. And some other references as well, but really the individual who's responsible or individuals who are responsible in the case of a school board for that hiring and retaining process would be who we think is the most valuable person to be talking to and getting a reference.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have a question on the April 27th FAQ or Q&A session there. So that will come on at 4 p.m. We should have the boardroom set up so that this can be projected to whomever chooses to come here. We'll get a copy of that, upload it to our website. Anything more we need to do on that date? It's not an official board meeting, correct?
I don't think so. I think, and Barb will talk more about this. You post it on your website after the meeting, so it'll be recorded, so people can go back and look at it, see what kind of information is out there. But I don't think there's anything additional you have to do for that Q&A.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
All right, well, just one quick question, and this is something I can get from Ashley or Kathy down the road here as well, but typically, how far in advance do you have your board packets prior to a meeting? 3 days? If you have a Monday meeting, you get it by Friday?
Correct.
Okay, that's just good to know. So I'm getting that information together for the interview training meeting on May 5th. That information will be out May 1st or thereabouts to Ashley and to get distributed and posted. Very good. Thank you. I really appreciate how well you all have worked together and moved through with this process. And we look forward to working with you over the next month and a half here.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank
Thank you.
Have a good evening, everybody.
You too.
Bye.
Okay, any,
I move we adjourn.
well, we're not to that.
Yeah.
One more.
We're still on that four. Is there anything else we should deal with?
Do we have to accept the resignation?
Well, that's number 5, and I don't think the resignation is going to be available,
It is.
or maybe it is.
6:01.
Ah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, oh, Mike has signed it. All right, well, then we can move on that. How did that appear, magically?
He must have sent it to me by email.
Okay,
They were voting on
so they voted 6-1. Yeah, well, that's not our business,
No.
how they voted.
it. I'll move to accept the resignation of Dr. Michael.
All right, it's been moved. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Are Jill and Dennis still here? Yeah, very good. Did you see the letter, Jill and Dennis?
No, I have not.
Okay, well, we have received a letter from Superintendent Funk indicating that he is resigning. It's signed. So he has signed his resignation. It is official. We, as of June 30th, we will not have a superintendent. Well, hopefully we will have one on
It won't
July
be
1.
Mike.
But in any event, the motion has been made by Kim and seconded by Bruce that we accept Dr. Funk's resignation. Is there any discussion on that? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, 7-0. Now, Bruce.
Not gonna say it.
All right, meeting's adjourned.
We know